August 14, 1945. San Francisco Bay, California. 23 Japanese prisoners stepped onto American soil for the first time. Blinking against sunlight that felt too bright for men who'd spent months believing they were already dead, Sergeant Takeshi Yamamoto gripped his cane, his shattered leg throbbing with each step down the gangway. Around him, his fellow captives moved slowly, faces blank with resignation. They'd been taught that capture meant dishonor worse than death itself. They expected torture. They expected starvation. They expected cruelty that would make them beg for the bullet they should have taken on the battlefield. What awaited them instead would shatter every certainty they'd carried into war. Before we continue, like the video and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from: Tokyo, New York, Berlin, anywhere. Your support helps us share untold stories of courage and humanity. Now return to August 1945, when 23 defeated soldiers learned their enemies were nothing like they'd been taught. At Fort Mason, they were processed quickly. Hot showers, clean towels, new PW uniforms. No cruelty followed. During the medical exam, an American doctor calmly recommended corrective surgery for Yamamoto's old shrapnel wound, a kindness he couldn't understand. That night, the mess hall offered meat, potatoes, vegetables, bread, even milk. Yamamoto stared, feeling his beliefs collapse. Act 1. The architecture of dishonor to understand what those 23 men felt staring at metal trays in August 1945. You must first understand what they'd been taught about surrender. Yamamoto had been inducted into the Imperial Army in 1941. A farmer's son from Nagano Prefecture who'd never questioned what his country asked of him. The training had been unambiguous. Death before dishonor. Capture was unthinkable. Surrender was betrayal of everything: emperor, family, ancestors, nation. The lessons were systematic, reinforced daily through every channel. Officers explained that Americans treated prisoners with savage cruelty, torture, starvation, humiliation designed to break the spirit before ending the life. Better to die fighting. Better to take your own life. Better anything than the shame of captivity. The indoctrination wasn't subtle, it was total. Japan's military culture had evolved from centuries of samurai tradition where defeat meant death by one's own hand to preserve honor. The Bushido Code demanded absolute loyalty, absolute sacrifice. During World War II, of the estimated 30,000 Japanese troops defending Saipan, only 921 were taken prisoner. The rest died. Some in combat, many by their own hands. That's a capture rate of 3%. 3%. The numbers tell the story of a culture that had weaponized shame into tactical doctrine. When Yamamoto was wounded on Saipan in July 1944, artillery shrapnel tearing through his left leg and shattering bone, his first instinct wasn't to call for help. It was to reach for a grenade, to finish what the Americans had started. The grenade malfunctioned. American medics found him anyway, bleeding out in volcanic sand. They treated his wounds, stabilized him, saved his life over his protests. He spent the year that followed in a hospital facility in Hawaii, recovering, waiting for the real punishment to begin, waiting for the cruelty propaganda had promised would come once he reached the mainland. But here's what Yamamoto didn't know. What none of them knew. The Geneva Convention of 1929 had established clear protocols for prisoner treatment. The United States had ratified it, had committed to following it. The rules were specific: adequate food, housing appropriate to climate, medical care, work that didn't directly support the war effort, protection from abuse. By 1945, America held over 425,000 Axis prisoners across hundreds of camps. German, Italian, Japanese. The system was vast, organized, designed for compliance with international law even when enemies showed no such restraint. The contrast was staggering. In Japanese captivity, Allied prisoners faced systematic brutality. It's the death railway in Burma, the Bataan Death March, Prison ships where men suffocated in holds. Of approximately 27,000 Americans held by Japan during World War II, roughly 40% died in captivity. In American camps, the death rate among Axis prisoners was under 1%. The difference wasn't accidents of war, it was policy. It was choice. It was a nation deciding that even defeated enemies deserved basic human dignity. Private Hiroshi Tanaka, the youngest of the group at 19, had spoken the unspeakable on the transport ship from Hawaii. "What if we were lied to?" he'd whispered. What if the propaganda about American treatment was false? The silence that followed his words had been thick with fear. Not fear of guards. Fear of truth. Because if the propaganda was lies, then everything else was lies too. The sacrifices, the deaths, the shame they carried. All of it built on foundations of sand. The train east from San Francisco took them through landscapes that looked impossible. Nevada desert stretching empty under stars. Utah mountains rising against sky. Small towns with lights burning without fear of air raids. America looked untouched by war. Abundant, peaceful. These people were never in danger. Corporal Kenji Nakamura observed quietly, his face pressed to the window. Their homeland was never threatened. They fought an ocean away while their families slept safely. The realization settled over them like weight. Japan had mobilized everything, every resource, every person, every ounce of national will bent toward total war. American civilians had faced rationing, certainly, sacrifice, yes. But their cities stood intact. Their infrastructure functioned. Their industrial capacity had expanded during the war, not contracted. The disparity explained defeat more clearly than any battlefield analysis could. Japan had bet everything on a war it couldn't afford to lose. America had committed only what it could spare to a war it couldn't afford not to win. By the time they reached Camp McCoy, Wisconsin on August 18th, something had begun to shift. Not acceptance. Not yet, but the first hairline cracks in certainty. The possibility that surrender might not mean what they'd been taught it meant. That capture might not be the end of honor, but a different kind of beginning. Act 2. The Architecture of Mercy. Camp McCoy sprawled across Wisconsin landscape like a small city of the defeated. Hundreds of barracks. Thousands of prisoners, most were German, captured in Europe after the Reich's collapse. A smaller section held Italians. The Japanese occupied their own compound, maybe 500 men total. Segregated less from hostility than from practical necessity. Different language, different culture, different war. Colonel James Harrison, camp commandant, addressed new arrivals through a Nisei interpreter, second-generation Japanese-American who spoke both languages fluently. His words were measured, professional, stripped of triumph or vindictiveness. You are prisoners of war under protection of the Geneva Convention. You will be treated humanely. You will receive adequate food, shelter, and medical care. You will work, but only in capacities allowed by international law. You will not be abused. You will not be starved. You will not be tortured. This is American policy. Any questions? The prisoners stood in silence. Questions? They had hundreds. But how do you ask why enemies are showing mercy? How do you question kindness when you expected cruelty? Barracks 14 became home. Its wooden structure heated by pot-bellied stove. 24 bunks with thin mattresses and wool blankets. Shared bathroom with running water. Windows with screens but no bars. Nakamura, who'd survived Iwo Jima before capture, walked through slowly, touching walls, testing bunks. These are better conditions than many soldiers experienced at the front, he said quietly. How is this punishment? How is this suffering for our dishonor? Day's established rhythm. Roll call at 6. Breakfast at 6:30. Work assignments at 7. The labor was varied. Grounds, maintenance, kitchen duty, laundry service, agricultural work on nearby farms. Geneva Convention prohibited using prisoners for military production, but non-military work was allowed. Encouraged, even idle prisoners grew restless. Work provided structure, purpose. Yamamoto was assigned to the camp library, light duty, suitable for someone with permanent injury. The facility was supervised by Corporal David Chen, Chinese-American soldier from San Francisco who'd studied Asian history before the war. Chen spoke some Japanese, enough to communicate. He treated Yamamoto with professional courtesy, explaining tasks clearly, showing patience when language created confusion. "You read English?" Chen asked on the second day, noticing Yamamoto examining a book about American history. "Little bit," Yamamoto replied, his English halting but functional. "I learned in school before war. If you want to improve, I can help." Library work is good for learning language. Yamamoto hesitated. "How will you help?" The question was blunt, necessary. Chen thought about it carefully. "Because the war is over. Because you're going home eventually. Because maybe if you understand America better, you'll help Japan rebuild into something better than what started this war." It was an answer, but not an explanation. The idea that enemies could help each other after war ended was foreign to everything Yamamoto had been taught. The food remained impossible to reconcile with expectations. 3 meals daily. Not generous by American standards, perhaps, but adequate. More than adequate. Yamamoto had grown up on a farm where meat appeared maybe once a week if the harvest was good. Here, protein came with every meal. The messel served prisoners the same rations American troops received. No distinction, no hierarchy of worth. In September, authorization came for prisoners to send letters home through the Red Cross. The letters would be censored. Delayed, but they represented first communication many had with families since capture. Yamamoto wrote to his parents with hands that shook. "Honorable Father and Mother, I am alive and being held in a prisoner camp in America. I write to inform you of my disgrace. I was captured rather than dying honorably. I have brought shame to our family. I accept any consequences you deem appropriate." The response took 4 months. When it arrived in January 1946, the words blurred through tears he couldn't control. "Dearest Takeshi, we received your letter with joy and relief. You are alive. That is what matters. The war is over. The old ideas about honor and shame are being questioned. You brought no shame. You survived. Come home when you can." Other prisoners received similar letters. Families grateful for survival. Parents questioning ideology that had taught their son's death was preferable to capture. A nation beginning to examine the lies that had led to destruction. Chen took his offer seriously about helping Yamamoto learn English. Informal lessons began in the library during slow afternoons. Vocabulary, grammar, discussions about American history and culture that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. "Why did America enter the war?" Yamamoto asked one day, his English improving steadily. "We were attacked," Chen replied. Pearl Harbor, December 1941. I know this history. But why did America fight so completely? Why not negotiate peace earlier? Chen chose his words carefully, because we believe some things aren't negotiable. Freedom, democracy, self-determination. Japan's military government was trying to dominate Asia through conquest. We oppose that. But America has territories too. Philippines, Hawaii Islands, across Pacific. How is that different? That's fair, Chen admitted. America isn't perfect. We have our own history of conquest, but we're trying to be better. The Philippines will get independence soon. We're learning that empire is wrong. I hope Japan learns the same lesson. These conversations were revolutionary. No Japanese officer would have allowed such discussion, such questioning of national policy, such admission of imperfection. But here in a prison library in Wisconsin, an American soldier and a Japanese prisoner debated complex topics as equals. November brought influenza outbreak. Dozens fell sick, fevers, coughs, body aches that wouldn't break. The camp hospital, designed for minor injuries, was overwhelmed. Yamamoto contracted the illness mid-month. His fever spiked to 104 degrees. His weakened leg became inflamed, the old wound reacting to systemic infection. He was transferred to hospital, delirious and barely conscious. For 3 days he drifted, his fever dreams mixed with waking pain. American medical personnel monitored him constantly, administered medication, changed for fluids, cooled his fever with ice baths. When consciousness finally returned on the 4th day, a doctor sat beside his bed, older man, maybe 50, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Welcome back," the doctor said in broken Japanese. "You gave us quite a scare." "Why?" Yamamoto's voice was barely whisper. "Why save enemy prisoner?" The doctor's expression hardened slightly. "Because you're not an enemy anymore. War is over. You're just sick patient who needed care. That's what doctors do. In Japan, prisoners were not treated with such care." "I know," the doctor replied quietly. "We've heard stories, seen evidence. It was wrong. Just because your military did wrong doesn't mean we should. We're trying to be better than that." Christmas came. Alien holiday for men raised Buddhist and Shinto, but the camp celebrated regardless. The messals served special meals, turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, pie, decorations hung from walls. The camp chaplain offered service, translated into Japanese for interested prisoners. He spoke about peace, reconciliation, forgiveness, about enemies learning to coexist, about possibility of building better futures from ruins of war. That evening, prisoners gathered in Barracks 14. They had no gifts, no special celebration, but they talked about home, about families, about what they'd learned in captivity, about what they'd do when they returned to Japan. "I want to teach," Tanaka said. He was 20 now, would be 21 by repatriation. "Teach children that war is destructive, that what we were taught about honor was lies, that enemies can be decent to each other." "I want to farm," Nakamura added, "like my father. Grow food, help rebuild, never touch weapon again." "I want to understand," Yamamoto said quietly, "about America, about democracy, about why they treat defeated enemies with dignity. I want to understand so I can help Japan become something better." They sat in warm barracks while snow fell outside. 23 men who'd expected death and found mercy, trying to make sense of it all. Act 3. The Price of Truth. By March 1946, repatriation was finally beginning. Ships were preparing, processing had started, and prisoners were choosing whether to leave or stay for paid camp work. Yamamoto volunteered to remain. His English was strong, his library work useful, and he wasn't ready to face Japan's devastation. Through spring and summer, he worked, learned, and grew close carefully to Corporal Chen, who taught him American politics and democratic ideas. They discussed futures. Chen planned college in San Francisco. Yamamoto wasn't sure what awaited him. In September, 13 months after arriving, Yamamoto received his orders. On his final evening, Colonel Harrison thanked him for his service to the camp. Yamamoto admitted America had contradicted every expectation. Harrison told him mercy was deliberate an attempt to break old cycles of revenge. Yamamoto said it had worked. He would return home changed, carrying a new understanding of dignity, humanity, and former enemies becoming partners. Resolution. What mercy built the voyage to Yokohama took 2 weeks. Yamamoto stood on deck as the ship approached Japan, seeing homeland for first time in 5 years. The coastline looked scarred. Cities showed bomb damage, even from distance. Everything looked smaller, more fragile, more damaged than memory suggested. When he disembarked, he was processed through repatriation facilities, examined, documented, given basic supplies and transportation vouchers, then released into Japan that felt more foreign than America had. His parents met him at train station in Nagano. They looked older, thinner, but alive. They embraced him, his mother crying, his father stoic but emotional, both welcoming him home without shame or judgment. That evening, over a simple meal of rice and pickles, his father spoke quietly. "Tell us about America. Tell us about captivity. Tell us truth, not what propaganda claimed." Yamamoto told his family about Camp McCoy, the medical care, steady food, Colonel Harrison, Corporal Chen, library work, English lessons, and the realization that enemies could treat each other with dignity. Propaganda had lied to them. "We were fools," his father said. "We believed leaders who sent sons to die for lies. We must question," Yamamoto replied. "Build Japan on truth." He became a translator for the occupation forces, bridging civilians and Americans as Japan rebuilt. He taught informal English classes, sharing not just language but values, democracy, individual rights, the importance of questioning authority. Former enemies could become partners. In 1948, Chen wrote from California. Their correspondence lasted decades, reflecting on recovery, reconciliation, and the fragile work of peace. In 1985, Yamamoto returned to America for the first time since repatriation. Retired now, father of three, he visited Wisconsin, walking the grounds of the camp that had reshaped his life. He found Chen, now a retired librarian, and they met in Madison, two old men once divided by war. "Did it work?" Yamamoto asked. "Between our countries, yes," Chen said. Japan rebuilt, became democratic, became a partner. That's unprecedented. "It worked because individuals chose dignity," Yamamoto said. "Commanders, guards, prisoners, all choosing to learn instead of hate." Yamamoto died in 2001. Among his belongings, his children found a journal. Christmas 1945 entry read, "I expected torture. Instead, I received food, care, dignity." Propaganda taught us lies. I cannot change my capture, but I can choose what it means. Real honor is not dying for lies, but living for truth. The story of Camp McCoy is small in the vast history of World War II. Yet for the men who arrived expecting death and found mercy, it meant everything. Wars truly end when individuals choose humanity over vengeance, truth over propaganda, and decency over cruelty, one act of dignity at a time.